Picture this: a packed courtroom in downtown Miami, summer of 2009. A judge sits elevated above the crowd, dressed in black robes that signify authority and respect. But then something happens that nobody expected. The judge slams his hand on the bench so hard that the sound echoes through the entire room. He's not angry about the evidence presented. He's not upset about a legal argument gone wrong. He's furious at a lawyer who dared to, well, let's just say, challenged his authority in a way he absolutely could not tolerate. Within moments, the lawyer is handcuffed. Within hours, the judge's behavior goes viral. And within weeks, questions are being asked about whether someone with this much power should ever lose control like that. Welcome back to the verdict room, where we examine the most shocking moments in legal history. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a question that fascinates millions. What happens when the people who are supposed to uphold the law completely lose their composure? Before we get into the wild cases, we need to understand something fundamental about the judicial system. Judges aren't just any professionals. They're vested with enormous power. They decide guilt or innocence. They determine sentences that can span decades. They control who speaks, when they speak, and for how long. This power requires something in return: restraint. The entire legal system depends on the public believing that judges are impartial, fair, and in control. The moment a judge appears biased, angry, or out of control, the legitimacy of the entire system is questioned. This is why there are actual rules governing judicial conduct. These rules exist to protect not just defendants and lawyers, but the integrity of justice itself. When a judge loses their temper, they're not just having a bad day, they're potentially undermining the very system they took an oath to defend. Now, before we talk about judges losing control, it's important to distinguish between anger and authority. There's a difference between a stern warning and a tirade. There's a distinction between maintaining courtroom order and abusing power. A judge can raise their voice to demand respect. They can hold someone in contempt of court for legitimate disruption. But when a judge's actions cross from maintaining order into personal vendettas, emotional outbursts, or discriminatory behavior, we've entered dangerous territory. This is the line we're going to explore today through real cases that shocked the legal world. Let's start with a case that became legendary in courtroom folklore. Judge Judith Scheindlin, yes, the actual Judge Judy, had an incident in her early days as a judge that almost nobody talks about. In the 1980s, Scheindlin was a New York family court judge, and she was already developing her signature no-nonsense style. But there was one particular day when a lawyer repeatedly interrupted her, challenged her rulings, and questioned her competency from the bench. Scheindlin, known for her sharp tongue, didn't just reprimand the attorney, she went off in a way that left courtroom observers stunned. She called the lawyer incompetent, suggested he didn't understand basic law, and made it clear that his career would suffer if he ever stepped foot in her courtroom again. Now, this incident never went viral because it happened before social media. But it illustrates an important point. Even judges we now know as icons of judicial authority have moments where they snap. What made Scheindlin different is that she learned from it. She became more controlled, more methodical, and eventually that discipline made her a respected jurist and later a television personality. But for the lawyer in that courtroom, the experience was traumatic and career-damaging. Now let's talk about a more recent case that actually resulted in serious consequences. In 2012, Judge Joseph Caputo of the Superior Court in New Jersey made headlines for behavior that went far beyond a simple outburst. During a hearing, a woman in his courtroom began to cry. This was a custody case involving her children. Instead of showing compassion or at least remaining neutral, Caputo allegedly told her, and we're paraphrasing here to keep this family-friendly, to essentially stop crying or face contempt charges. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. In another incident, Caputo used profanity on the bench and made derogatory comments about a witness's appearance. The lawyer who reported him said it was like watching someone in a position of absolute power just completely abandon any sense of decorum or basic human decency. What made this case particularly significant is that Caputo's behavior wasn't isolated. Over several years, complaints accumulated. Litigants came forward. Other attorneys reported him. And finally, in 2014, The New Jersey Supreme Court suspended Caputo from the bench for 6 months and ordered him to undergo psychological evaluation and anger management counseling. This was huge because it sent a message. Even judges aren't above accountability. But perhaps the most dramatic example of judicial meltdown happened right here on the federal level. Judge Gerald Choflat, a respected appellate judge, presided over a case in the early 2000s that involved a complex corporate litigation matter. One of the attorneys, a well-respected litigator named Ronald Machen, made an argument that Choflat disagreed with. Instead of calmly explaining why he rejected the argument, Choflat launched into a blistering personal attack. He questioned Machen's intelligence, his ethics, and his understanding of the law. He kept going, his voice rising, his words becoming more cutting. At one point, he told Machen that he was an embarrassment to the profession. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone knew they were witnessing something they shouldn't be. A federal judge losing control in a way that had nothing to do with courtroom management and everything to do with personal animosity. The incident was reported. An investigation followed. And while Choflat wasn't removed from the bench, his reputation took a serious hit, and legal scholars cite this case as an example of how even experienced judges can allow their emotions to override their judgment. So what actually happens when a judge loses their temper and it's documented? Well, there are several possible consequences, and they escalate based on the severity. First, there's contempt of court charges, though these are usually reserved for people disrupting the courtroom, not the judge themselves. Second, there's a complaint to the Judicial Conduct Board. Most states have these boards. They investigate allegations of judicial misconduct. Third, if the board finds evidence of improper conduct, the judge can face discipline ranging from a written reprimand to suspension, to, in the most severe cases, removal from the bench. Fourth, and this is important, if someone can prove that a judge's outburst was motivated by bias or resulted in an unfair trial, appeal courts can overturn verdicts. A conviction can be thrown out. A sentence can be vacated. This means a judge's loss of composure doesn't just affect their career, it can literally unravel years of legal proceedings. This is why the rules exist. They're not there to restrict judges unfairly. They're there to protect justice. Understanding the rules of judicial conduct helps explain why judges are held to such a high standard. In most states, judges are bound by a code of judicial conduct. This code requires judges to avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. It requires them to act with dignity and impartiality. It requires them to control their emotions and maintain decorum. These aren't suggestions, they're ethical obligations. When a judge takes the bench, they're essentially making a contract with the public. I will treat everyone fairly, I will remain objective, and I will uphold the law regardless of my personal feelings. When a judge breaks that contract by losing control, they're not just having a human moment. They're violating a sacred trust. The punishment fits the crime because the crime strikes at the heart of what the legal system is supposed to be. But here's where it gets complicated. Judges are human. They deal with emotional cases involving abuse, exploitation, and tragedy. They work impossibly long hours. They face disrespect and challenges to their authority regularly. Some people argue that expecting judges to never raise their voices, never show frustration, never react emotionally is unrealistic. And maybe there's some truth to that. The question then becomes, where's the line? When does firmness become aggression? When does authority become abuse? When does maintaining order become personal vendetta? These are the questions that judicial conduct boards grapple with constantly. And it's why every case is evaluated individually, considering context, impact, and patterns of behavior. What we've learned from these high-profile cases is that consequences do exist, but they're not always swift or severe enough to deter bad behavior. Judge Caputo continued his conduct for years before facing suspension. Judge Choflat's reputation damage was significant, but he wasn't removed. And countless judges engage in borderline behavior that never gets reported or investigated because people fear retaliation, or because they're unsure if what happened was actually misconduct. The system, while it has safeguards, is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it. This is why transparency matters. This is why cases like these being discussed analyzed and understood by the public matters. When judges know that their behavior will be scrutinized, that it will be discussed in legal circles and on social media, that it could impact their legacy and career, they're more likely to maintain control. Accountability, even the threat of it, is a powerful deterrent. As we wrap up, let's step back and think about what all of this means. Judges are supposed to be the voice of reason in a system often characterized by conflict and emotion. They're supposed to be the adults in the room. When they lose their temper, they're failing a fundamental part of their job. But they're also human beings, and that creates a tension that's never fully resolved. The answer isn't to hold judges to an impossible standard of complete emotional suppression. It's to hold them accountable when their emotions cross the line into abuse, bias, or unfairness. It's to ensure that the judicial conduct system works swiftly and fairly. And it's to remember that the integrity of justice depends on judges maintaining the very composure and dignity that they demand of everyone else in their courtroom. When that breaks down, justice breaks down with it. If you found this breakdown compelling, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of authority lose control? Do you think judges are held to the right standard of accountability? And if you want more deep dives into the moments that define our legal system, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We upload new episodes every week, breaking down the cases, the law, and the drama that keep people fascinated by the pursuit of justice. Thank you for being here in the verdict room. We'll see you next time.